When I arrived at Le Jardin Noir, Portland's most exclusive French restaurant, for my mother-in-law's 65th birthday celebration, there was no chair waiting for me at the family table. My husband Derek just shrugged and said, "Oh well, looks like the reservation got mixed up." As his entire family exchanged knowing glances and barely suppressed smirks, I smiled sweetly and announced, "No problem at all. Since I'm clearly not needed here, I'll just head home." What they didn't realize as I walked out of that dimly lit dining room was that I had exactly 45 minutes before they would discover I'd systematically dismantled every single arrangement for Victoria Ashford's milestone birthday weekend. The venue, the catering, the live jazz quartet, the custom birthday cake, the wine pairings, the floral arrangements, the photographer, gone. All of it. When the maître d' approached their table with an apologetic expression and a very uncomfortable conversation about cancelled reservations and missing payments, Victoria's face drained of all color. "Where's Camila?" she whispered, finally understanding that the daughter-in-law she'd spent 3 years trying to humiliate had just orchestrated the most spectacular birthday disaster in Ashford family history. Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow, but let me back up and tell you exactly how the wife of a successful architectural restoration specialist became the woman who single-handedly destroyed the social event of the season in less than an hour. Because this story isn't just about one missing chair, it's about what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person. Before we dive into how I turned the tables on the most entitled family in Portland's Hawthorne district, I want you to know that if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been deliberately excluded while everyone pretended it was an accident, this story is going to resonate with you in ways you might not expect. What started as a simple birthday dinner became a masterclass in strategic revenge that changed not just my marriage, but my entire understanding of what I was willing to tolerate in the name of keeping the peace. My name is Camila Rodriguez Ashford. And 3 years ago I was just Camila Rodriguez, a 32-year-old senior project coordinator at Heritage Restoration Partners, one of Portland's premier firms specializing in historic building preservation. I'd worked my way up from an entry-level drafting position to managing million-dollar restoration projects for the city's most significant landmarks. My expertise in historical architecture research, vendor coordination, and project management had earned me recognition throughout the Pacific Northwest preservation community. I was detail-oriented, deadline-driven, and had built a reputation for bringing complex, multi-phase projects in on time and under budget. That's how I met Derek Ashford at the restoration gala for the Commodore Hotel downtown. He was there representing his family's real estate development company, Ashford Properties, which had donated significantly to the Historic Preservation Fund. Tall, with sandy brown hair and an easy laugh, Derek had the confident demeanor of someone who'd grown up assuming doors would open for him. But unlike many of the privileged attendees that night, he seemed genuinely interested in the restoration work itself, asking thoughtful questions about the challenges of maintaining historical integrity while updating infrastructure. "You really know your stuff," he'd said after I explained the complexities of preserving original crown molding while installing modern electrical systems. "I'd love to learn more about what you do. Maybe over dinner sometime?" The Ashfords were what you might call Portland aristocracy, old money that traced back to timber and shipping fortunes built in the early 1900s. They owned prime real estate throughout the city, sat on boards of cultural institutions, and their name appeared on plaques in half the museums in town. Derek's mother, Victoria, was particularly prominent in social circles, known for her charity fundraisers and her impeccable taste in everything from wine to interior design. Our courtship was something out of a romantic movie, at least in the beginning. Derek pursued me with genuine enthusiasm, seeming to find my passion for historic preservation fascinating rather than boring. He'd pick me up after long days coordinating with contractors and city inspectors, eager to hear about whatever architectural mystery I was solving. When I worked late preparing presentations for city council meetings, he'd bring dinner to my office. He introduced me to his friends as the brilliant woman who's saving Portland's history, and I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. The warning signs were subtle at first, like hairline cracks in a building's foundation that only become obvious when the structure starts shifting. Victoria's initial reaction to me was polite but cool. "How interesting," she'd said when Derek first introduced me at their weekly family dinner. "Architecture. That's quite technical." The way she said technical made it sound like I worked in sewage treatment rather than historic preservation. Derek's father, Harold, was more openly dismissive. During that same dinner, when I mentioned working on the restoration of the Morrison Bridge's historic elements, he interrupted to redirect the conversation toward Derek's latest real estate acquisition. Speaking of buildings, Harold had said, Derek closed on the Riverside property today. $3 million, cash. The message was clear: your little restoration projects were quaint, but real business happened in the family. Still, I chalked it up to protective parents who needed time to warm up to the idea of their son dating someone outside their social sphere. Derek seemed to understand my discomfort and made efforts to include me, defending my career when his father made snide comments about playing with old buildings. I thought we were building something real, something that could bridge the gap between my working-class background and his world of inherited wealth and social expectations. Looking back now, I can see that Derek was performing the role of supportive boyfriend while his family systematically evaluated whether I was worth keeping around long-term. But at the time, I was falling in love with a man who seemed to value my intelligence, my work ethic, and my independence. When he proposed 14 months after we met, I said yes without hesitation, genuinely believing I was marrying into a family that would eventually accept me. I had no idea I was actually walking into a 3-year campaign designed to make me disappear. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. The wedding planning should have been my first real warning about what marriage into the Ashford family would actually look like. Victoria had very specific ideas about what constituted an appropriate celebration for her son, and none of those ideas included my input, despite the fact that it was my wedding too. "Darling," she'd said during our first planning meeting at her sprawling Laurelhurst mansion, "I've already spoken with Genevieve at Portland Country Club about the venue. She's holding the grand ballroom for us, such a coup, considering how booked they are." She handed me a folder thick with vendor contracts, all bearing the Ashford family crest. "I've also arranged for Bouchard Catering. They did the governor's daughter's wedding last year, and I have a preliminary guest list of about 300 people." I stared at the papers, feeling like I was reviewing blueprints for someone else's life. 300? Derek and I were thinking something more intimate. Maybe 100 guests at most. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in her pale blue eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, this isn't just Derek's wedding. It's an Ashford family celebration. We have certain obligations to our community. People will expect to be invited." When I suggested incorporating some of my family's Mexican traditions, perhaps a mariachi band during cocktail hour or serving my grandmother's famous mole alongside the French cuisine, Victoria physically recoiled. "How colorful," she said, the word dripping with barely concealed distaste. "But I think we should maintain a more cohesive aesthetic. Perhaps we could include a small mariachi performance during the rehearsal dinner instead? Something more private." Derek, who had been scrolling through his phone during most of this conversation, looked up long enough to say, "Whatever makes you both happy," before returning to his screen. It was becoming a pattern, Derek's complete abdication of responsibility whenever his mother and I disagreed about anything. The wedding itself was beautiful in the way that Victoria's vision of beauty always was: expensive, traditional, and completely devoid of my personality. I wore the dress she'd selected, vintage Vera Wang, much more elegant than anything contemporary, carried flowers she'd chosen, white peonies and roses, classic and timeless, and walked down an aisle lined with guests who were primarily strangers to me. My own family, my parents, my siblings, my cousins who had driven up from California, looked uncomfortable and out of place among Portland's social elite. During the reception, I overheard Victoria explaining to a group of her friends that Derek had married a lovely Mexican girl who works in construction. When I corrected her later, explaining that historic preservation was quite different from construction work, she patted my arm condescendingly. "Of course, dear. It's wonderful that you have such a practical skill set." The real systematic undermining began after the honeymoon. Derek and I had chosen to live in a beautifully restored 1920s craftsman bungalow in the Irvington neighborhood. A house I'd actually helped research during its restoration process years earlier. I loved everything about it: the original hardwood floors, the built-in bookcases, the way morning light filtered through the leaded glass windows. But Victoria had opinions. "It's quite small, isn't it?" she'd said during her first visit. Walking through our living room with the careful steps of someone avoiding contamination. "Derek, darling, you know there's plenty of room at the estate until you find something more suitable. Something befitting your position in the family business." When Derek didn't immediately shut down the suggestion, I felt the first real crack in my faith in our marriage. "I think we're very happy here," I said firmly. "This house has incredible character, and the neighborhood is perfect for our lifestyle." "Character," Victoria repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it." The weekly family dinners became a special kind of torture. Every Sunday at 6 p.m. sharp, Derek and I would drive to the Ashford estate for what Victoria called family time. These gatherings followed a rigid formula: cocktails in the library, where I was inevitably left out of conversations about people and places I'd never heard of. Dinner in the formal dining room, where my attempts to contribute to discussions about art, culture, or city planning were politely ignored or redirected, and coffee in the solarium, where Victoria would hold court, dispensing opinions about various members of Portland society. Harold would spend these evenings treating me like an interesting but ultimately irrelevant accessory to his son's life. When I mentioned working on the restoration of the historic Multnomah Athletic Club, he'd nod politely and then immediately pivot to asking Derek about quarterly projections for their commercial properties. When I tried to share stories about navigating complex city permitting processes or coordinating with preservation societies, Harold would glance at his watch and mention that he needed to make some calls, but it was Victoria's approach that truly wore me down. She had perfected the art of the compliment that wasn't quite a compliment, the suggestion that wasn't quite a criticism, the exclusion that wasn't quite intentional. "Camila, dear, you look tired. Have you been working very hard on your little projects?" Or, "I was telling Patricia Wainwright about your job, and she was so impressed that you're able to work with your hands like that. She said it reminded her of her housekeeper, who's also quite handy with repairs." The exclusions started. Small. Family photographs taken when I was in the bathroom, or when Derek failed to mention that the photographer was coming by. Invitations to events that somehow never reached me, leaving Derek to attend alone while apologizing that I was unfortunately unable to make it. Conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room, followed by meaningful glances and quick subject changes. Derek's response to my growing frustration was always the same: "That's just how Mother is. She means well. She's actually quite fond of you, she just has her own way of showing it." When I pressed him to address specific incidents, he'd minimize them. "You're being a little sensitive, don't you think? She's not used to people from different backgrounds. Give her time to adjust." The professional undermining was perhaps the most infuriating. Despite my years of experience and proven track record, Victoria would introduce me at social events. As Derek's wife who dabbles in old buildings or such a sweet girl, very handy with renovation projects. When I corrected these mischaracterizations, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, you know I never get the technical details right. But it's wonderful that you're so passionate about your hobby." The turning point came during last year's historic preservation Society Gala, an event where I should have been recognized as a professional peer, not Derek's plus one. I had been nominated for the Young Professional Achievement Award for my work on the Schnitzer Concert Hall restoration project. It was a significant honor, one that could have opened doors for my career throughout the region. Victoria had insisted on hosting a pre-event cocktail party at the estate for key supporters of the arts. When Derek and I arrived, I discovered that she had failed to mention my nomination to any of the guests, despite the fact that several were board members of the Preservation Society. Instead, she spent the evening introducing me as Derek's lovely wife and steering conversations toward her own philanthropic activities. When we arrived at the gala itself, Victoria had somehow arranged for Derek to be seated at the head table with the board members and major donors, while I was placed at a table near the back with spouses and other family members. From my distant seat, I watched my professional peers network and collaborate while I made small talk with people who had no interest in preservation work. When my name was called as the winner of the Young Professional Achievement Award, I had to walk across the entire ballroom to reach the stage. As I accepted the crystal trophy and delivered my prepared remarks about the importance of preserving Portland's architectural heritage, I could see Victoria in the audience, her expression a careful mask of polite interest that didn't quite hide her annoyance at being upstaged. The final insult came after the ceremony, when several Preservation Society board members approached our table to congratulate me and discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Victoria immediately inserted herself into these conversations, steering them toward her own involvement in various cultural organizations and making it clear that any future discussions should go through the family's established channels. That night, as Derek and I drove home, I tried to explain how humiliated I felt by the seating arrangement and his mother's behavior. "I'm tired of being treated like an accessory to your life instead of a professional in my own right," I told him. "Tonight was supposed to be about recognizing my work, and your mother turned it into another opportunity to remind everyone that I'm not really part of your world." Derek's response was the same as always: "You're overreacting. Mother was just trying to be helpful. She knows a lot of people in the preservation community. She was probably trying to make connections for you." But I was beginning to understand that Derek's willingness to let his mother minimize and exclude me wasn't about conflict avoidance or family loyalty. It was about his own comfort with a dynamic that kept me off balance and dependent on his family's approval. As long as I was focused on trying to win Victoria's acceptance, I wouldn't notice that Derek himself had never truly stood up for me or our marriage. The birthday planning request should have been the moment when everything changed. Instead, it became the setup for the most spectacular miscalculation the Ashford family had ever made. 2 months ago, Victoria approached me with what she presented as an olive branch. "Camila, darling," she said during one of our increasingly tense Sunday dinners, "I have a special request. As you know, my 65th birthday is coming up in November, and Harold and I have decided to do something truly memorable this year." She paused dramatically, savoring what she clearly believed was a moment of magnanimous generosity. "We'd like you to plan the entire celebration. Use all of those organizational skills you've developed in your restoration work. Consider it our birthday gift, giving you the chance to showcase your talents for our family and friends." Derek beamed as if his mother had just offered me the keys to the kingdom. "Isn't that incredible, Cam? Mother specifically asked for you. She wants you to handle everything: venue, catering, guest list, the works." I should have seen it for what it was immediately. Victoria Ashford had never, in 3 years of marriage, shown any genuine interest in my professional capabilities. But I was still foolishly hoping that maybe, finally, this was her way of acknowledging my skills and welcoming me into the family fold. "I'd be honored," I replied, already mentally cataloging the connections I'd built through years of restoration project coordination. What kind of celebration did you have in mind? Victoria's smile was radiant. Something elegant, of course. I'm thinking dinner for about 60 of our closest friends and family members. Somewhere with real atmosphere, perhaps that new French place downtown that everyone's talking about. And Camila, dear, I want you to handle absolutely everything. Don't worry about budget constraints. This is a milestone birthday, after all. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the planning with the same meticulous attention to detail. That had made me successful in historic preservation. I researched venues, interviewed caterers, coordinated with florists, and even arranged for a jazz quartet that specialized in 1950s standards, music I knew Victoria loved from her youth. Le Jardin Noir was perfect, intimate enough for meaningful conversation, elegant enough for Victoria's standards, and with a private dining room that offered views of the city lights. The executive chef, Philippe Dumont, was enthusiastic about creating a custom menu featuring Victoria's favorite dishes. I coordinated wine pairings, arranged for personalized menu cards, and even commissioned a custom birthday cake from Portland's premier pastry chef. Every detail was documented in my project management system, the same software I used for $1 million restoration projects. Vendor contracts, payment schedules, timeline coordination, backup plans for potential issues. I treated Victoria's birthday with the same professional rigor I brought to preserving historic landmarks, but as the celebration approached, I began noticing strange inconsistencies. Phone calls that Derek took in private, conversations between Victoria and Harold that stopped abruptly when I entered rooms, and an odd reluctance to finalize certain details that should have been straightforward. The first real warning came when I tried to confirm the final guest count with Victoria 2 weeks before the dinner. "Oh, there might be a few last-minute changes," she said vaguely. "You know how these things go. People's schedules are so unpredictable." When I pressed for specifics, caterers need exact numbers. After all, Victoria became evasive. "Just plan for 60, dear. Maybe a few less. We'll sort it out closer to the date." The second warning came when Derek mentioned, almost casually, that his sister Rebecca would be flying in from San Francisco for the celebration. Rebecca, who lived 3 hours away by plane, whom I'd met exactly twice in 3 years of marriage, and who had never shown any previous interest in family celebrations. "That's wonderful," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I should call her to coordinate travel arrangements and make sure she knows about the dress code." "Oh, don't worry about that," Derek said quickly. "Mother's already handled all the family coordination. You just focus on the venue details." That's when the pattern became clear. I was being allowed to handle the logistics, the grunt work of vendor coordination and payment processing, while being systematically excluded from anything involving family dynamics or guest management. I was the hired help, not the family member. The breaking point came exactly 1 week before the celebration. I was working late at the office, finalizing the timeline for the evening, when I received a call from Philippe at Le Jardin Noir. "Ms. Rodriguez Ashford," he said, his French accent thick with confusion, "I am calling about the reservation for next Friday. There seems to be some confusion about the seating arrangement." "What kind of confusion?" I asked, pulling up my detailed floor plan on my computer. "Well, the woman who called this afternoon, she said she was Mrs. Ashford's assistant. She requested that we modify the table setting. Instead of the round table for 12 that you specified for the immediate family, she wants us to arrange for 11 seats." My blood went cold. 11 seats? Yes, she was very specific. She said there had been a last-minute change in the family attendance, and that 11 would be the correct number for the main table. I sat in my empty office, staring at my computer screen, feeling pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. Victoria didn't have an assistant. Victoria had called the restaurant herself, pretending to be staff, to ensure that there would be no seat for me at the family table. "Philippe," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to ignore that call completely. The reservation stands as originally planned. 12 seats at the main table." "Of course, madam." I apologize for the confusion. After hanging up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my office, finally understanding what was really happening. This wasn't about celebration or family inclusion. This was about orchestrating a public humiliation. Victoria had given me the responsibility of planning her birthday dinner specifically so that my exclusion would be more dramatic, more obvious, more painful. That I could see it all playing out exactly as she'd planned it. I would arrive at the restaurant to discover no seat waiting for me. The family would express surprise and mild embarrassment. Someone would suggest I could pull up a chair from another table, or perhaps there was a small table nearby where I could sit. The message would be clear to everyone present: Camila Ashford was not really family, just someone who could be tolerated when convenient and discarded when not. But Victoria had made one critical miscalculation. She had assumed that my role in planning this celebration was purely administrative, that I was simply a coordinator with no real power or authority. She didn't understand that in my professional world, the project manager doesn't just organize events, they control them. Every vendor contract was in my name. Every payment authorization went through my business credit accounts. Every relationship with caterers, florists, musicians, and restaurant management had been built through my reputation and connections. Victoria had handed me complete operational control of her milestone birthday celebration, thinking she was giving me busy work while she orchestrated my humiliation. She had no idea she had just given me the power to destroy everything she cared about. I opened my laptop and began pulling up vendor contact information. Not to confirm details for a successful celebration, but to begin documenting exactly what I would need to dismantle everything in the most efficient way possible. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Rebecca Chin, not Derek's sister, but my own attorney who had handled the legal aspects of several historic preservation projects. "Rebecca, I need to understand something about contract law. If I'm the signatory on vendor agreements and the primary point of contact for payment, what are my legal obligations if I choose to cancel services?" "That depends on the specific terms," she said. "But generally speaking, if you're the contracting party and you're within the cancellation windows specified in each agreement, you have the right to terminate services." "Are you talking about a project issue?" "Something like that," I said. "What about the deposit recovery process?" "If you cancel within the contract terms, most reputable vendors will refund deposits, minus any non-refundable processing fees." "Why? Is there a problem with one of your restoration projects?" "Not exactly a restoration project," I said. "But definitely something that needs to be carefully deconstructed." That evening, I went home and cooked Derek's favorite dinner, chili rellenos with my grandmother's secret sauce recipe, a dish that Victoria had once described as too spicy and ethnic for civilized palates. As we ate, I listened to Derek talk about his day, his upcoming business trip, his excitement about his mother's celebration. "I think this dinner is going to be really special," he said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Mother is so grateful that you're handling everything. She keeps telling people how lucky we are to have someone with your organizational skills in the family." I smiled and nodded, asking questions about the guest list, about his father's health, about Rebecca's flight arrangements. I played the role of the loving, invested daughter-in-law while mentally calculating timelines for systematic cancellation. "Derek," I said as we cleared the dishes, "I'm curious, what exactly did your mother tell you about the seating arrangements?" "For Friday? Seating arrangements?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't know. I assumed you'd handle all that." "Why?" "Just making sure I have all the family preferences right," I said. You know how important it is to your mother that everything be perfect. That night, lying next to my husband in our beautiful craftsman home, listening to him sleep peacefully while planning his mother's social destruction, I realized that my marriage had been over long before I'd understood it was ending. Derek's willingness to let his family systematically exclude and humiliate me wasn't about family loyalty or conflict avoidance. It was about his fundamental belief that their comfort mattered more than my dignity, but they had all underestimated exactly how much power they had handed me, and how precisely I knew how to use it. The morning of Victoria's birthday, I woke up at 5 a.m. with the calm clarity of someone who had spent a week preparing for battle. Derek was still sleeping, completely unaware that this would be the last day he could pretend his family's cruelty was just how they were. I made coffee, reviewed my cancellation timeline one final time, and began executing the most satisfying project management plan of my career. My first stop was Le Jardin Noir, where I needed to handle the most delicate part of my operation. Philippe greeted me with his usual professional warmth, assuming I was there for final coordination details. Bonjour, Madame Rodriguez Ashford. Everything is prepared beautifully for this evening. The flowers arrived this morning, and the wine selection is chilling perfectly. Philippe, I'm afraid there's been a significant change, I said, pulling out my phone to show him the documented evidence I'd prepared. I've discovered that Mrs. Ashford has been making unauthorized modifications to our arrangements, including attempting to alter seating without my knowledge. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. In the high-end hospitality world, clients who make backdoor changes are red flags for potential payment issues or other problems. As the contracting party, I continued, I'm exercising my right to cancel this evening's reservation. According to our agreement, cancellation with 7 days' notice results in a full refund minus the processing fee. Philippe looked genuinely distressed. Madam, are you certain? Perhaps we could resolve whatever miscommunication occurred? I'm afraid the trust has been broken, I said firmly. I'll need you to process the cancellation immediately and email me confirmation. The Ashford party will likely contact you later today, but they have no contractual standing to reinstate services. Of course, madam. I am very sorry this situation has developed. Walking out of Le Jardin Noir, I felt the first surge of genuine satisfaction I'd experienced in months. 1 down, 7 vendors to go, the florist was next. Carmen Delacroix had been excited about the elaborate arrangements we'd planned. White orchids and roses with touches of gold, designed to complement the restaurant's elegant aesthetic. When I called to cancel, she was shocked. But Camila, these are some of my finest pieces. Are you sure there isn't another solution? I'm completely sure, Carmen. Something has come up that makes the celebration impossible. I'll need the deposit refunded according to our contract terms. Well, if you're certain. I suppose I can try to place these arrangements with another event this weekend. By 9 a.m., I had systematically contacted every vendor involved in Victoria's celebration. The jazz quartet, disappointed but professional about the cancellation. The pastry chef, who had spent 2 days crafting an elaborate custom cake and was understandably frustrated. The wine merchant, who had carefully selected vintage bottles to complement each course. The photographer Victoria had specifically requested to document her milestone birthday. Each conversation followed the same pattern: initial shock, attempts to salvage the situation, and finally resigned acceptance when I made it clear that cancellation was non-negotiable. My reputation in Portland's vendor community was solid enough that no one questioned my authority to make these decisions. The most satisfying call was to the transportation company that was supposed to provide luxury sedan service for out-of-town guests. Yes, this is Camila Rodriguez Ashford canceling the vehicle reservations for tonight, I said, watching Derek get ready for work through our bedroom window. All of them. The airport pickups, the hotel transfers, everything. By 10 a.m., every single element of Victoria's perfect birthday celebration had been systematically dismantled. The deposits were being processed back to my business accounts. And I had email confirmations documenting every cancellation. Derek left for work with a kiss and a cheerful "see you tonight, birthday planner extraordinaire." I spent the rest of the morning at my own office, handling legitimate restoration project business while monitoring my phone for the inevitable calls. They started coming around 2 p.m. The first was from Rebecca, Derek's sister, calling from San Francisco International Airport. "Camila? I'm at the airport and the car service never showed up. I've been waiting for 45 minutes. Do you have the driver's contact information?" "Oh no," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Let me look into that for you." There might have been a miscommunication with the transportation company. 20 minutes later, Derek called from his office. "Hey babe, I just got a weird call from Philippe at Le Jardin Noir. He said something about a cancellation? I think there might be some confusion about tonight." "A cancellation?" I said, as if this was the first I'd heard of it. "That's strange. Let me call him right back and sort this out." The calls kept coming throughout the afternoon. Harold, wondering why the florist had left a voicemail about unavoidable changes to the evening's arrangements. Victoria herself, increasingly frantic as vendor after vendor confirmed that their services had been cancelled by the contracting party. Each time, I expressed appropriate shock and concern, promised to investigate immediately, and suggested that there must be some terrible misunderstanding that I would resolve as quickly as possible. By 4 p.m., Victoria was in full panic mode. "Camila, what is happening? Every single vendor is saying their services have been cancelled. The restaurant, the flowers, the music, everything. I'm trying to figure it out myself," I said, sitting calmly in my office while reviewing the timeline for the evening's final act. It's almost like someone with contracting authority deliberately cancelled everything, but I can't imagine who would do such a thing. "Can you fix it? Can you get everything back?" "Victoria, it's 4 p.m. on a Friday. Le Jardin Noir is booked solid tonight. The florist has already sold our arrangements to another event. The musicians have taken another gig. I'm not sure there's anything that can be salvaged at this point." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. When Victoria finally spoke again, her voice had a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "Camila, did you cancel my birthday celebration?" "Victoria," I replied, my voice perfectly calm, "why would I do that? I've spent weeks planning this evening. I was so looking forward to celebrating with the family." But she knew. Maybe not exactly how I'd done it, but she knew. At 6 p.m., I arrived at Le Jardin Noir dressed in the midnight blue dress I'd selected specifically for this moment. The restaurant was bustling with Friday evening energy, but the private dining room where Victoria's celebration should have been taking place sat empty and dark. Derek was standing outside the restaurant entrance, talking frantically on his phone. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. "Thank God you're here. This is a complete disaster. Everything's been cancelled and no one knows why. Mother is beside herself. Do you think you can work some magic and salvage something for tonight?" "I can certainly try," I said, linking my arm through his. "Let's go inside and see what Philippe can tell us." The Ashford family was gathered in the restaurant's bar area, looking like survivors of a natural disaster. Victoria, usually pristine and composed, looked genuinely shaken. Harold was making angry phone calls to lawyers, as if legal threats could resurrect a canceled birthday party. Rebecca sat hunched over her phone, probably trying to change her flight back to San Francisco. When Victoria saw me approach, she stood up with the controlled fury of someone barely containing an explosion. Camila. How lovely of you to join us. I'm so sorry about this confusion, I said, accepting Derek's gesture toward a chair at their table. I've been trying all afternoon to understand what happened. Yes, Victoria said, her voice like ice, it is quite the mystery, isn't it? That's when Derek made the comment that sealed his fate along with his mother's. Looking around the group. With an awkward laugh, he said, well, I guess we miscounted somewhere along the line. The irony was perfect. After 3 years of his family miscounting me out of photographs, conversations, and considerations, Derek had just used the same dismissive phrase to describe the complete destruction of his mother's social event. Actually, I said, standing up and smoothing my dress, I don't think anyone miscounted anything. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the email folder where I'd saved confirmation of every single cancellation. Every vendor was canceled by the contracting party, me, this morning between 8 and 10 a.m. Le Jardin Noir, Delacroix Floral, the Meridian Jazz Quartet, Laurent Pastry Studio, Columbia Wine Merchants, Elite Transportation Services, and Mitchell Photography. All of it. Systematically. Deliberately. The table went completely silent. Derek's face shifted from confusion to dawning horror. Harold stopped mid-sentence in his phone conversation. Rebecca looked up from her phone with her mouth slightly open, but Victoria's expression moved through several stages of emotion before settling on a cold rage that made her look like an entirely different person. You, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, canceled my birthday celebration. I did, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Just like you canceled my seat at this table. The difference is, I actually had the authority to cancel what I canceled. Derek found his voice first. Camila, what the hell are you talking about? Your mother called the restaurant a week ago, pretending to be her own assistant, and requested that they reduce the seating at the family table from 12 to 11. She orchestrated this entire celebration as a way to publicly exclude me, assuming I'd just sit quietly and take the humiliation. I turned to address the entire table, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet restaurant bar. But here's what none of you understood: I wasn't just planning this party. I was controlling it. Every contract, every payment, every vendor relationship went through me. When you decided I wasn't family enough to deserve a seat at your table, you forgot that I was family enough to destroy your table entirely. Victoria stood up so abruptly that her chair knocked backward. You vindictive little. Careful, I interrupted, pulling out my phone again. We're in public, and I'm recording this conversation. I'd hate for your reaction to this situation to become part of the story when people ask what happened to your birthday celebration. Derek grabbed my arm, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Stop this right now. We can fix this. No, Derek, I said, gently removing his hand from my arm. We can't fix this. Because this isn't about tonight. This is about 3 years of your family treating me like an inconvenience they had to tolerate, and you letting them do it. I looked around the table one more time, taking in their shocked faces, their obvious fury, their complete inability to process that someone they'd viewed as powerless had just systematically destroyed their carefully planned humiliation. Seems. I'm not family, I said, echoing the words that had started this entire chain of events. So I'll see myself out. And with that, I walked away from the Ashford family for the last time, leaving them to figure out how to explain to their 60 invited guests why there was no celebration to attend. I drove home through the Portland evening in complete silence, my hands steady on the wheel, feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. Behind me, I'd left the Ashford family to explain to 60 prominent Portland socialites why they'd been invited to a birthday celebration that no longer existed. The thought of Victoria having to make those phone calls, one by one, admitting That her meticulously planned social event had been cancelled by the daughter-in-law she tried to humiliate filled me with a satisfaction that was almost intoxicating. My phone started ringing before I even reached our neighborhood. Derek, of course. I let it go to voicemail. Then Harold. Then Victoria herself. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had 17 missed calls and a text message from Derek that simply read, "Come back. We need to fix this now." I poured myself a glass of the expensive Spanish wine Derek had given me for our anniversary, wine that Victoria had once dismissed as too bold for refined palates, and settled into my favorite reading chair to wait. I didn't have to wait long. Derek burst through the front door 45 minutes later, his face red with anger and humiliation. "What the hell was that, Camila? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I have a very clear idea of what I've done," I replied calmly. "I refuse to participate in my own humiliation." "I'm curious, what did you tell the 60 guests who showed up expecting a birthday celebration?" "We had to send everyone home," he exploded. "Mother spent an hour making phone calls while people waited in the restaurant lobby. Harold had to arrange for the bar tab for 60 people who drove across town for nothing. Rebecca missed her flight back to San Francisco because she was dealing with the chaos you created." "The chaos I created?" I set down my wine glass and looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Derek, your mother deliberately arranged for there to be no seat for me at her birthday dinner. She planned this entire celebration as a way to publicly exclude me from the family. And you're angry at me for refusing to play along?" You don't understand how these things work," he stammered. "Family dynamics are complicated. Mother wasn't trying to hurt you. She was just what?" I interrupted. "Testing me? Teaching me my place? Reminding me that I'll never really belong?" Derek slumped onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. "This is going to ruin us socially. Do you understand that? People will talk about this for years. The Ashford name will survive," I said. "What won't survive is our marriage." The words hung in the air between us, and I saw the exact moment when Derek realized that this wasn't just about his mother's birthday party. This was about everything that had been broken between us for years. "Camila, come on. We can work through this. I'll talk to Mother. I'll make sure she apologizes and..." "Derek, stop." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where we'd built what I thought was our life together. "In 3 years of marriage, you have never once stood up for me against your family. Not when your mother introduces me as your Mexican wife who works with her hands. Not when your father dismisses my professional achievements. Not when they exclude me from family photos or change dinner plans without telling me. You always have an excuse for their behavior, but you never have a solution. That's not fair. I've tried to keep the peace, you've tried to keep yourself comfortable," I corrected. "And the price of your comfort has been my dignity." Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. "So what happens now?" "Now I call my lawyer and we figure out how to end this marriage with as little drama as possible," I said. "I'm moving out this weekend." The immediate aftermath was exactly as messy as Derek had predicted. But not in the way he'd expected. Within 24 hours, the story of Victoria Ashford's cancelled birthday celebration had spread through Portland's social circles like wildfire. But the narrative that emerged wasn't the one Victoria had hoped to control. My phone started ringing Saturday morning with calls from people I hadn't heard from in months. Linda Chin from the Preservation Society, calling to say she'd heard something dramatic had happened and wanting to make sure I was all right. James Morrison from the Historic District Council, mentioning that he'd always admired how I handled difficult clients and wondering if I was taking on new projects. Even my former colleagues from Heritage Restoration Partners reached out, having heard through their own social networks that I was making some big changes. The story that circulated wasn't about a vindictive daughter-in-law who'd ruined a family celebration. It was about a successful professional who'd finally had enough of being treated poorly and had used her considerable skills to make a point. In Portland's preservation and architecture communities, where collaboration and respect were essential for project success, my refusal to tolerate disrespect actually enhanced my reputation rather than damaging it. Victoria, meanwhile, was discovering that her social standing wasn't as unshakable as she believed. The guests who'd been inconvenienced by the cancelled celebration weren't just annoyed about wasted evening plans, they were embarrassed about being unwitting participants in what they now understood was a family power play. Several of Victoria's own friends privately reached out to let me know they thought her behavior had been inexcusable and that they admired how I'd handled the situation. The most satisfying response came from Rebecca Chin, my attorney, who called Monday morning with an update on the divorce proceedings. "I've been practicing family law for 15 years, she said, and I've never seen a case where the opposing party was so eager to settle quickly and quietly." Derek's lawyer called this morning asking what it would take to expedite everything. "What did you tell them?" "That you want a clean break, no alimony, no claims on the family business, and that you keep everything you brought into the marriage plus the restoration consulting business you built during the marriage." They agreed to everything within an hour. The Ashford family's eagerness to make me disappear as quickly as possible was the final confirmation that they understood exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. They weren't just dealing with the social embarrassment of one cancelled party, they were facing the reality that I had documentation of every slight, every exclusion, every undermining comment from 3 years of marriage. If the divorce became contentious, if they tried to paint me as unreasonable or vindictive, I had the evidence to tell a very different story about their systematic cruelty. Derek came by the house one last time before I moved out, ostensibly to collect some personal items but really to make one final attempt at reconciliation. "I know Mother was wrong," he said, looking around our living room as if seeing it for the first time. "I should have stood up for you more." "I should have, Derek," I interrupted gently, "you're not a bad person. But you're not strong enough to be married to someone your family doesn't approve of. And I'm not willing to spend my life trying to earn approval from people who've already decided I'm not worth respecting." 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment in the Pearl District, overlooking the Willamette River, when I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. The Portland Historic Preservation Society was hosting their annual awards gala, and they wanted me to serve on the planning committee. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being asked to plan the very kind of high society event that had once been used to exclude me, but now I would be planning it as an equal partner, not as someone's inconvenient +1.my consulting business had exploded in the months since the divorce. Word had spread through Portland's professional networks that I was available for independent projects, and my reputation for meticulous planning and uncompromising standards made me highly sought after. I was working on the restoration of a 1920s theater, consulting on a historic district rezoning project, and collaborating with the city planning department on new preservation guidelines. But the most meaningful change wasn't professional, it was personal. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. I was Camila Rodriguez, historic preservation specialist, not Camila Rodriguez Ashford, Derek's wife who worked in construction. I was making decisions based on my own values and priorities, not constantly calculating how to avoid family conflict. The last time I saw Victoria Ashford was at a charity fundraiser downtown. She was across the room, holding court with a group of women I recognized from her social circle, but when our eyes met, she quickly looked away. The woman who had once wielded social exclusion like a weapon now seemed smaller, diminished by the knowledge that her tactics had backfired so spectacularly. Derek remarried 8 months after our divorce was finalized. His new wife, Amanda, was everything Victoria had wanted for her son: blonde, wealthy, with a pedigree that traced back to Portland's founding families. I heard through mutual acquaintances that the wedding was a small, family-only affair. Apparently the Ashfords had developed an aversion to large social celebrations. As I write this story, almost 2 years after that night at Le Jardin Noir, I'm preparing for my own celebration, the grand reopening of the Commodore Hotel, the same venue where Derek and I first met. I led the restoration team that brought the building back to its 1920s grandeur, and seeing my name on the plaque in the lobby as the project's lead preservation specialist filled me with more pride than any family dinner ever could have. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things ended, if I wish I'd handled the situation differently. The answer is simple: I regret nothing. I learned that respect isn't something you can earn from people who've decided you don't deserve it, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying. The missing chair at Victoria's birthday dinner wasn't an insult, it was a gift. It showed me exactly where I stood in their world, and it gave me the clarity to build a world of my own, where my seat at the table was never in question because I was the one setting the table, and that, I've discovered, makes all the difference. 2. Incredible stories are waiting for you right below. If this one grabbed your attention, these next ones will too. Click to dive in.